I want to thank you all for coming here tonight on such a wintry night as tonight is. I hope this is not setting us up for bad things to come. But tonight I want to try to share with you everything I know, all the knowledge I have of this man, Samuel Boyd, and why he's characterized as the father of our city. And I think after the presentation, you'll probably, I hope, end up agreeing with me that he is indeed the father of our city when you see everything that I have to say. All right, let's get into why is this man called the father of our city. Sam Boyd was born on Walker Street, June 2nd, 1815. He was the sixth of 11 children of John and Sophia Boyd. His ancestors came over here in 1636 and settled in Boston. His grandfather fought in the Revolutionary War. We think the house that he was born in, that the two generations of Boyds was born in, is this house here, but we're not 100% sure. It's on the corner of River Street and Walker Street. This being River Street here, and this is Walker Street here. But we're not 100% sure of that. It could have been a house that's where the old Inland Express, as a lot of us know, or somewhere around there, because there's new buildings. All it says in the history of him is that it was on Walker Street near Maple Street. So it doesn't say on the corner or anything like that. But he had a very limited education, very limited. Maybe he was lucky if he went maybe a few weeks in the wintertime to school. And then he was fortunate enough that he got to do 1 to 2 terms at the Marlborough Academy, which was also called Gates Academy, which would have been where the Walker Building is on Main Street now. And it was built back in the 1800s. And he was being taught under the great teacher, old W. Albee, who was, if you go through the history books, especially in education, that's all you see is about old W. Albee. He lived in a brick house. It's the oldest brick house left in Marlborough on the corner of Central and Mechanic Street. It's still there. I think it's a multi-family house now, but that's where old W. Albee lived. He went off at age 14 to apprentice, and he did that with a fellow named, from Northville, named, I lost his name, Colonel Joseph Davis, whose brother was the governor of Massachusetts at the time. So he spent 7 years under the tutelage of Joseph Davis, learning the tanning and currier business and other parts of the business to learn it. When he was ready to go into business for himself, into the shoe business, he was warned that the farming town of Marlborough was no place for him to perform his trade. His ambitious reply was, and I want you to remember this, other men in other towns have stayed at home and helped build up their native place, and that is what I propose to do. And you're going to see that he was a man of his words about that. You know, in 1836, prior to him starting up in the shoe industry, Marlborough was a farming town. Marlborough's principal product to ship to other towns was cider brandy. We had a lot of apple trees here, so that was the big thing they made. Outside of that, they were pretty self-sufficient. They had grist and sawmills, coopers, blacksmiths, tinsmiths, basket makers, 2 or 3 general stores. So they really didn't need anything else, but that was the major industry, was shipping off cider brandy. So he started in March of 1836 making shoes at 85 Maple Street. 85 Maple Street is still standing. It's right across the street from the American Legion on Maple Street. You can't miss it. When he started there, he started with his brother Joseph in a 20 by 30 L, which is like a addition, a side thing of the house. And it was probably towards the back here, around over here, back in here. And his brother had started it in 1835, and his brother had tutored and learned his trade from Colonel Ephraim Howe of Marlborough, who was the leading shoemaker in Marlborough in the early 1800s. Prior to 1836 and Samuel Boyd coming upon the scene, they were just individual shoemakers that made the shoes in their homes in what they called 10-footers, 10 by 10 buildings. And they would make one shoe at a time. It would take them forever. And they'd go around to people's houses and take orders, and sometimes they'd stay at the person's house for a week while they were making shoes for the family, because they wouldn't be back. So sometimes little Johnny had to wear the shoes for, while he was 5 years old, 6 years old, 7 years old, 8 years old. So he was the leading shoemaker until Samuel Boyd came along. But he revolutionized, as you're going to find out, the shoe industry. By 1837, he needed more room already. And he had this idea that instead of one person making the shoe, that maybe we could get teams of, more people making shoes. One's making the soles, one making the last, one making this, and so forth, and then put them together. Sort of as Henry Ford did years later in the auto industry. He kind of brought that on in the shoe industry. And he built on 45 Maple Street, which I don't believe this is the same building he built, but it's right here. An accountant owns the building and has his practice down here, McAllister, and I believe his son, Kevin, has a law firm up on the second floor. And he in there he made different parts of the shoe. I believe it was the sole leathers and the bottom work was done in this building here. Then what he did was he rented a room in this building at 30 Maple Street, which is right across, right in this building here, right across the street from 45 Maple Street. And over there, he had people where they made the uppers. They cut them out and they made them up. And then he took those and brought them back to his original place on Maple Street and put the shoes together, had people to put them together. So you could see how he started the mass production of shoes at an early stage. Joseph, his brother, retired in 1839 and moved to St. Louis. Now Joseph, in all the history book things I've read about Joseph, was a very small man in stature, same as Sam Boyd, but Sam was a little bit taller than him, but he was barely over 4 feet tall, Joseph was. But Sam was a little man. They talk about him in different times as for a small man, he had such a large heart and a large brain and so forth, things like that. So maybe it was just the family were just all small like that, but I'm not sure. He moved to St. Louis because he wanted to, that was the outpost at the time, and he wanted to find out what was going on there and other parts and down south. He traveled all around trying to find out what needs were in the shoe industry, so he would know that. So it was very important. His brother John, in 1841, joined Samuel in a partnership. In 1842, John invents the shoe dye, which really gave an upper edge to Sam Boyd and to the shoe industry in general in Marlborough, because no one else had the dye. The dye, you see it right up here, there's a couple of them on the table up here you can look at after. They were used to cut out the patterns and everything. And it was very quick. They just take a big mallet hammer and bang over the leather and cut it right out. And that really, and it got to be more uniform than doing it by hand, trying to cut it out by hand. So that gave them a real upper edge. So between mass production, the shoe dye, he really had the upper edge on a lot of other shoe factories and a lot of other communities. Now, you got to remember back then, they were just starting up in Milford, in Lynn, in Haverhill. The shoe industry was starting up too. So he needed more room then because of all what was happening. So he built what's called the Common Shop. You're going to be shocked when you see where this was. John Rose Funeral Home. That's why they call it the Common Shop, because it was right next to the Commons down in front of the First Church. And So he moved into there because they were so busy. He had the others that he kept going though too. So Joseph returned and took the place of John. He did have other brothers that would work there every so often, but John played an important part because John, as I said, invented the shoe dye, which gave him a big advantage. And so he played a big part of it. But Joseph now returned, and from learning everything from being out west, down south, traveling around the country, what the people's needs were and so forth. So he brought all this information back with him. So he played a very important role in that. In 1849, he partnered with Thomas Corey and built the corner shop, on Maple Street, which became Boyd and Corey. There it is right there. You would know it today as a laundromat. All right? This is Maple Street over here, and this is Main Street right here. And there's a laundromat there right now. It used to be a gas station. That was the first Boyd and Corey shop with the two of them in business. And so they were there for quite a while, and then he moved on, and he was so getting bigger and bigger and bigger. He said he came up with the idea, we're going to make shoes in teams of 12. So he took 12 people from start, one person would be at the very beginning and so forth all the ways up, and they'd have a shoe done. So instead of waiting a week to have a pair of shoes done, they were pouring out pairs of shoes like you can't believe every day in their teams of 12 in all their different factories. Then he needed more space, as you can see here in 1855, so he built what's called the brick shop on Main Street. And then he went on in 1858 and built Boyd's Block on Main Street, this was the brick shop right here, and this was Boyd's Block here. I'm just going to go back here and tell you, in 1865, Thomas Corey retired and went south and re-entered the firm in 1868. I tried to find out why he went south, but it could have been because he was going down there to, because of the Civil War and whatever, because they were doing an awful lot of business during the Civil War, both with the North and the South. A lot of the shoe firms up here weren't supposed to be doing business with the South, but money won out over that in a lot of cases, and they were. So then in 1866, they needed more room. He built a 40-foot connection to join the two buildings together where today's Corey building stands. So he built this 40-foot connection. Today, you would know this as that right there, the Corey building on Main Street in the corner of Florence and Main. Of course, that's not this building here. As you can tell, they had a major fire here. They had another fire here. Had a lot of fires back then. Most of the places were made out of wood, although this was made out of brick. We have a picture upstairs in our archives of a major fire to this building here that was completely demolished from the fire. Even that wasn't big enough. They kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So he built a large factory at the corner of Howe and Main Streets, which eventually became the largest in the country. There it is right there. It was, there were 5 floors, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the basement, which was kind of exposed on Howe Street. Howe Street was over here, and this was Main. This is Bolton Street right here, and the fire station would have been, it wasn't built then, but it would have been built right here in the early 1900s. So, next picture is kind of blurry. It's an old picture that Joan Abshire found, and tried to get it to come out as good as possible, but we weren't able to. It's taken from the top of Town Hall, the old Town Hall that burnt down, and then we had to build the City Hall. But it's kind of blurry, but it gives you a side view from the Town Hall clock. This is looking down like that. This would have been Howe Street down here. So it's additions, and it kept going back and back and back. So it was the, back then, it was the largest shoe factory in the country. It had about 50,000 square feet. Today, that's nothing. But back then, it was a lot. It was a lot. And this is where today, this is Chin's Garden here, and this is the parking lot here. This is where the building was, right here, right there, to give you an idea. They were so successful, Boyd and Corey, that even the Japanese got wind of them. And they got visited on August 5th, 1872, by the Japanese embassy from Washington to visit the factory to view the efficiency of producing shoes in volume. Because all around the world, they weren't mass producing shoes. It was still being made by one person here, one person there, but it wasn't being mass produced. So they came all the ways up to take a look, and they paid a visit. They spent most of the day there in August 5th, 1872. Unfortunately, in 1874, Thomas Corey, his partner, died, which must have been a sad day for him. From everything I've read, they were very close, very, very close, very good friends. Besides being business partners, they were very, very good friends. So, and very successful. Both of them were very, very successful. So that must have been very hard on Samuel Boyd when that happened. But he carried on. He carried on the business and left the name Boyd and Corey. He didn't take Corey's name out of it after Thomas Corey died, but he kept it going as Boyd and Corey. Just to give you some statistics, when he started business in 1836, the population of Marlborough was around 1,800. That also included Hudson. Hudson was part of Marlborough then. All right? In 1855, it grew to 4,288, 19 years after he started. You know, when he first started, they were making children's shoes. Most of the early shoemaking was children's shoes, which you'll see some up here on the table. We have some that have been donated to us. You can take a look at them after. And it was closer to around the 1860s when they started producing boots and adult shoes and so forth. The population grew to 5,810. 1866, when Hudson was established, it lost 1,800 of its people. By 1890, when Marlborough became a city, it had grown to 13,000 people. And that was because of the Boyds starting the shoe industry. And everybody else, a lot of people that worked for them, they went and they started up their own factories. A lot of major factories around the country from people that worked under him, that learned to trade from them and went on to out on their own and so forth. But you can see how fast it grew in 54 years. You know, it was one of the major reasons why Marlborough became a city in 1890, because of the growth of it, because of how busy it became. You know, and back then being a city was meant a little bit more than a town, and so forth. So, so it played a vital importance in us becoming a city. In 1845, the total value of shoes produced was only $92,000, almost $93,000. By 1890, the total produced at his factory alone was $1,500,000. Now that's in 1890. So that's 122 years ago. So equated in today's figures, that would be quite a bit. That would be up in hundreds of millions. In 1875, the average capital invested in value of product per establishment, Marlborough outstripped the much larger towns of Lynn and Haverhill by far, by far. They had more people working in the shoe industry, but they didn't have them in teams and so forth. They weren't mass producing like we were. They were, they were bigger than us. They had more shoe factories than us, but they had less people working in them. They hadn't got that together. They didn't have the shoe dye that his brother had invented and so forth. So we really had the upper edge on these other communities that were big shoe producing communities. They were, Milford, Lynn, Brockton, Haverhill, Marlborough, we were all some of the major shoe producers in the Northeast, and then others like in where there was rivers and so forth, like Lawrence and those places, they were more into mills, cotton and things like that. So, but we outstripped them all by far. Really by far. As I stated earlier, in 1879, it was reported that the largest shoe factory in the country was the Boyd and Corey factory on Main Street. So even though it was only 50,000 square feet, it still was the largest in the country. So that's quite an accomplishment. He really believed in giving back to the city of Marlborough. So his factory office was accountant office or savings bank for the town up until the Marlborough Savings Bank was founded in 1860. So he was acting like the bank for the town government, for everybody. His office was the accountant office and the savings bank combined. He promoted and financed the agricultural branch railroad. This is quite a story. It started at Marlborough Junction. If none of you know where Marlborough Junction is, it's down at the Marlborough-Southborough line, down by the old Trotton Park, all right, down there is a junction. The rail goes off to Westboro there, but it used to come right up, right into downtown Marlborough, right behind where the Savings Bank was in the corner of Main and Florence Street, right behind there. It came up to there. And to this here, this was the depot. This is the old town hall right here. That's where that picture was probably taken from of the factory. But this was the railroad depot, and they had a freight depot in the back. He had to go through quite a bit to get that done, because the politicians in Boston that represented Haverhill and Lynn and all these other places was trying to block him, because that was the one advantage they had over him, over Marlborough, was they had easier way to ship to Boston, to ship their goods out, because everything got shipped into Boston to get shipped to down south, out west, wherever, overseas, wherever it was going. So they were tying them up to every way. You know what Sam Boyd did? He said the hell with them, and he built it anyways, on his own. And he raised some money from other private people in Marlborough, and he built it on his own. And finally, 2 years later, the legislature finally says, well, it's already in, so they approve it 2 years after the fact. But if he didn't take it full by the horn and do it, it never would have happened. So by building it, and things got built a lot faster back then, it gave them that took away the advantage that Lynn and the other communities had. So he took quite a risk in doing it, but that's the way he was, he would take a risk like that to get things done. He promoted a local gas company. He did this so he could have, for his factory, to light his factory, the gas lights and so forth. Also for sale, he was a real entrepreneur, this man, for sale to the general public. Unfortunately, the first 2 years into it was a new thing. His barn, which you'll see a picture of later, burned to the ground, his own barn. And like he had said, thank God it was my barn and not one of our customers' barns. But he started the first gas company around here. He began a company to supply the town with water from Lake Williams. This is Lake Williams back in the turn of the century. That's an old ice house up here. This is the pump station down here. This everybody I think knows. And everybody's asking me today, where's the top of the water tank? I must have had 6 people ask me today, where's the top? Does anybody know? Because I don't know. I know they're renovating it. I think it's about a $750,000 renovation to it that they're working on. So they probably disassembled it to do something and putting it back up. This would be where the courthouse is today, right here, is where the courthouse would be, well, more like right there today. So he started it 4 years later to finally he ran his own private water company and started putting in the pipes and all that. Of course, there were wooden pipes back then, but finally the selectmen voted, hey, this is a pretty good idea, maybe the town should be running it. And they voted it, and he just gave it, what he had done, over to them, and they took over the water system in Marlborough. He erected an indoor skating rink on Fairmont Street, right behind, would be right behind where the Masonic building is today. It would have been right behind that. And he built this skating rink for the pleasure of people. It didn't last too long, maybe 2 years, and the fad died off, and he made it into a public hall where they had public meetings and things like that. And then he sold it to a good friend of his, someone named F.W. Riley, who was like a conductor, into music and so forth. And he started Marlborough's first theater. So it was the first Marlborough theater there. And long gone, of course, got torn down many, many, many years ago. One of his biggest feats that he ever did was build the electric street railway. He really thought that he had built the first in the country when he built it, only to find out that he got beat by 2 weeks by, it's still kind of unclear whether it was Baltimore or Richmond, Virginia, but he got beat anyways. And he was the second electric trolley system in the country. And there you can see a trolley going up Main Street around the turn of the century here. Right there. They had rebuilt the depot. You saw a picture of the old depot. They tore it down and built this new depot. And there's the Corey building. So this is in the early 1900s because this got built right around the turn of the century. And this here was the Princess Theater. And this building right here, you can just barely see, is the building the big fire last year that burnt down to the ground. The big fire. Everyone remembers that fire. So the trolley system started from Marlborough Junction, which I showed you earlier, where the trains came from, and came up Maple Street. On Maple Street, where the fire station, today's fire station is, was one of the car barns. He had a car barn there for that the trolleys would go in to get fixed, turn around and repairs and stuff like that. He also had one across the street later on, where McDonald's is, basically that area, general area. He also built one there. A big house on the corner of Madison Street and Maple, a big house, is his foreman that ran the trolley system. That was for him. He built a lot of big houses for his foremans of the factories. A lot of big houses you see in Marlborough are just that the shoe barons built them for their foremans. The foremans made good money. The people who worked in the factories didn't make good money, but the foremans made good money. So it came up Maple Street to Main. The first route was, and then up Main Street. And they had turnoffs, like, so in case the trolley was coming down and this was going up, they had them set apart a different distance. So this one could go over here to the right, and the other one could pass, and then that one would come back out onto the track and go on its way. And then they went up by Monument Square, up Mechanic to Lincoln, took a left on Lincoln, and at the time, the first time it opened, went up to Pleasant, took a left on Pleasant, down to West Main, took a left at West Main, back down the Monument, back down Main Street, and the same thing. Then he did add on, he went farther up Lincoln to Broad, took a left on Broad, down to West Main, and then a left down West Main, and also had a spur that went up East Main Street. The main reason he built that was that the workers could get to work on time, which was important to him. Plus, they didn't have much time to eat, and a lot of them had to bring pail buckets and things like that to eat, and a lot of them were complaining they couldn't go home to eat and so forth. Well, they could hop on the trolley for a penny, and maybe they lived up on Broad Street, and they worked at his big factory down there across from the fire station. And they could go up there, have a meal, and come back down, and maybe, I don't know what they got for, maybe a half hour or 45 minutes for lunch, and be able to do that. Now, he was very entrepreneurial because he said the factories were open Monday through Saturday. They worked 6 days a week, but they didn't work Sunday. So they didn't get much use of the trolleys on Sunday. So what he did was he owned land down on Maple Street, off of Maple Street, called Chestnut Hill, which he eventually gave to, end up giving to the city. But he built a park down there. So on Sundays, the people had to take the trolley down there because he had the car barn down there too. And they'd take it down there, and they'd have, they have concerts and other things going on there at the park. And So he was very entrepreneurial. Now he had more work for his trolleys instead of them sitting around on Sunday not doing much of anything. So as I say, he was a real entrepreneurial spirit and really came up with a lot of different ways to make money, make the city better. He was always thinking of making the city better, not just himself. I mean, he knew that by doing a lot of these things, by bringing in the railroad and the gas company, a lot of these helped his business, but he also helped all the other people along the way. So he understood that. Besides that, he owned a coal business. He owned a machine shop, a rather large machine shop. He was the largest holder of real estate in town. He built, sold, leased houses, sold land, took back mortgages. A lot of the other shoemakers, the later years, like Howe and Fry, a lot of the houses you see in Marlborough were built by these people, by Boyd and Corey, by S.H. Howe, by John Fry, Charles O'Connell. A lot of them built houses. They built them for their workers. As I was telling you, they built the bigger ones for their, a lot of the houses that you see down on Newton Street, Park Street, that Fairmont, that whole area, it's real nice houses. They're built by Sam Boyd. And they were for foremen or merchants, doctors, wealthy people of the time lived in those big houses. So he did an awful lot of real estate in the city and helping build the town up. As I said, he donated a lot of land to town, but most notably was Chestnut Hill, which was a large landhold, and I think it was about 40 acres or 50 acres, that he, which would be all that land. A lot of it's developed now, but up behind the old Marlborough Enterprise, there's a hill that goes up like that. That's what's called Chestnut Hill, and he owned that whole section there. Besides where he built his house, which I'm going to show you coming up pretty soon here, on Fairmont Hill, he owned tons of land in that whole area up there. He had bought an estate of someone, I can't remember his name, but that owned a lot of old derelict houses that he ended up ripping down and rebuilding houses there and a lot of land. So, so he did build up an awful lot of the city. He was very involved civically. He was the very first president and one of the founders of the Marlborough Savings Bank. And he was also president director of the First National Bank. He was chairman of the Marlborough Philharmonic Society. He loved music. And that's how he got to know that F.W. Riley I was telling you about, that bought the old skating rink off of him and turned it into a theater. Hated politics. Absolutely hated politics, but got talked into running for selectman, and after one term he says, "I've had enough, that's it." So he was a one-term selectman. Same thing with the Massachusetts General Court. They kept after him and after him and after him, and he finally said, okay. And he only served one term there too. But he says, I can better serve my community other places than in politics, And, but he was civically involved. He was very charitable. He gave the land and construction of the French Protestant Church. Now, a lot of you might say, what? Where is that? Where the heck is that? There it is right there. We know it today as the Italian Church, which is closed up on Lincoln Street. But that was there before the Italian Church. He gave them $1,000 to buy the land there, and then he gave them $600 towards building the structure. It doesn't sound like a lot of money, but you got to remember, back then it was a lot of money. So he also gave $400 for the land for the Holy Trinity Church. Does anybody know where that? I know Susan does. I don't want you answering, Susan.
Where the Dunkin' Donuts is today.
Yeah, Judy knows. It's where the Dunkin' Donuts is today. This was what was where Dunkin' Donuts is today. That church there, all covered in ivy. It was a beautiful church. That's a postcard right here, but I remember this. I used to walk home by this, and Judy probably did too, on our way home from school, and it was such a beautiful church. It's Walter, I'm sure you remember it too, walking by that. It was gorgeous. And so this is where Dunkin' Donuts is today. This is where Conley's law office is over here. The old KSC building would be right there. But he bought the land for them to build that. He also, we used to have a YMCA in Marlborough, believe it or not, back then in the 1800s, Young Men's Christian Association. And he was very religious, which you'll find out later on here. But so he donated money to them over the various years. Same thing with his church. As a member of the First Church, he was a very generous financial supporter. He gave money to every Marlborough Civil War soldier that had a family. He'd be down there, and they were getting ready to leave, and he'd put money in each one of them's hands, every one of them that was going off to fight, so that their family would have money while they were away fighting. He gave money, and that, there was, let me tell you, Paul, how many people fought from Marlborough in the Civil War? Quite a few, hundreds of them fought in the Civil War. So there was quite a few. His pastor stated, after he passed away, that he gave more than anyone knew. In the memorial service they had for him afterwards, they told a story of this stranger that came to town. There was a businessman, but he moved to town. He knew no one knew him, but he wanted to start a business, and he went to Sam Boyd. And he said, I know you don't know me, but I got this idea, I want to do this. And Sam Boyd lent him the money to get going. And he became very successful because of that. So he was like that, you know. If he could see someone that was a young man with a good idea, and because that's the way, when he started business, he had no money. He had his hands, he had the trade he learned, and that was it. But they had no money. They were fortunate they had their parents' house to work out of, but that was it. And the idea of making it mass-produced shoes. So he had that. Joan found a picture of an $1890 bill. By the way, 92, I'm sorry. Joan Abshire, one of our members here, has helped me put together the PowerPoint presentation. And a lot of this comes from her. I want to make sure she gets a lot of credit for that, because it was been a lot of work, especially putting up with me, that's for sure. So this is the First Church where he was a member, which is right at the top of Bolton Street above the Commons. A lot different than today, because this came down in the hurricane of 1938, and it's more like right here now, you know. So it's a big difference. But for some of you that didn't know, taking a look at it, you might say, where the heck was that? But that's the First Church. Personal. He was married in 1845 to his first wife, Anne F. Brigham. Anne died in 1881. He went on to marry his second wife, Mary Lizzie Lawrence of Shrewsbury, shortly thereafter. Back then, it was not uncommon to marry within 3 months, 6 months, or whatever. Sometimes it was not uncommon to marry your sister-in-law or someone like that. So, you know, it was shortly thereafter. All they said in the history stuff is shortly thereafter. She died before he died in 1889. 4 daughters were listed in his obituary. Mrs. Samuel Dowland of Somerville, Mrs. Henry Aldrich of Boston, and he had 2 that they ended up never marrying, Florence and Lydia of Marlborough. He lived in a stately Italianate mansion on Fairmont Hill, on the crest of Fairmont Hill. This is the crest of Fairmont Hill. This is the summit, the top right here. This is Fairmont Street coming up like that. Newton Street's down here. This is the Liberty Street over here, or Rheingold here. He had a 20-acre parcel, and that was his house and barn right there. And this is what it looked like, right there. It was a magnificent mansion where he held balls and social events all the time. And, you know, it's one of the biggest sins we have in Marlborough. Thomas Corey's mansion's another one, and a lot of others that are long gone. Ella Bigel's house that was on the corner of Pleasant and Lincoln Street, that's now a Shell gas station. It was a mansion. They had a ballroom on the top floor. It was so big. But I'll be prepared for this next picture, because this is what it looked like in 1973.
Oh my God, awful.
1973, that's what it looked like. It had been made into like a 4 or 5 family. And there were You can see it's so dilapidated, it's unbelievable. Here's some other interior pictures of it. You can see the nice staircase. So you see the circular staircase here. Look at the back. Look at the back of it here. You know, it's just a shame. But I'm going to read to you an excerpt from a woman who lived there in 1913. It won't take that long, but she describes the house, the interior of the house. It's quite interesting. She lived there on and off for 30 years. The lower part of the house was red-faced brick and the top white with a metal roof. The circular tar driveway to the mansion had a border of tall pine trees, and in the center of the lawn, a huge silver maple tree with 5 limbs and a circle at the base. With a board between the limbs, it made a fine place to sit and read on a sunny summer day, as I often did. An iron hitching post and 8 granite steps led to the entrance porch with square pillars. When I go back to the good picture, you can see the what she's talking about, the front stairs right here, down in here, with square pillars. The front door was massive with panels of frosted flowered glass and a fan-shaped glass over the door. Unfortunately, it's kind of shaded, so you can't see that. The foyer was very impressive with a fireplace and a circular mahogany staircase going up 2 flights of stairs, and had 6-foot-high niches for statues at intervals. To the right of the foyer was the formal parlor, a long room with a beautiful white marble fireplace, carved with grapes over the firebox, and a very large Rococo gold leaf mirror reaching to the 12-foot-high ceilings. To the left was a library with stained glass doors, another fireplace and glass shelves for books, a large conservatory for plants and flowers adjoining the library. The smaller reception room had an outside balcony facing the street. The dining room was entered from the foyer and had a parquet floor and was large enough to serve 20 people. The fireplace with German tiles around it was made in Chelsea by the law company and presented the 4 seasons. The walls and ceiling were dark green plaster with gold leaf circles. A huge kitchen with the usual black stove set in the wall had many ovens and about 8 lids. It extended across one end of the room. From the foyer on the right side was a powder room for gentlemen only. Then a long conservatory for plants leading to a billiard room. It was large enough for a pool table and perhaps 4 card tables. On the second floor were 5 big bedrooms with walk-in closets and a dressing room. The windows in most of the house touched the floor and had inside shutters. A full bathroom and a half one were on this floor, and 2 small rooms in the back, possibly for household help, with a stairway directly to the kitchen. I'm sure it was the kitchen help. The 3rd floor had 1 room we called the boat room. It had round windows in each direction. The rest of the space was used by 2 attics. More stairs led to the top of the house. This had 16 windows and a view in every direction for miles. Now, back then, you could see this house for miles and miles around, because not like today, everything built up and so forth, but you could see this house from all angles. The large 2-storied barn, which was in the back here, which you can see is Italianate, such as the same construction as here, was beautifully lined with oiled match boards, had rooms for the coachman and outside help upstairs. Huge chests built into the walls for harnesses and equipment of the fancy horses owned by Mr. Boyd. The 20 acres that belonged to the estate had tar walks with garden flowers and many apple, pear, and cherry trees. Located on one of the 7 hills of Marlborough, there was always a breeze and a wonderful view. Sam Boyd built this house for his family and lived there until his death in 1892. He must have had many happy days there, enjoyed his mansion as we did too. You can see what a beautiful house that had to have been, only for it to fall upon something like that. Today, this is what's there. Condominiums. If you go up Fairmont Hill and the house on the left, and you see number 64, Look to your right and you'll see the condominiums. There's 1, 2, 3 sets of buildings. And this is where his house was, right in here. That's what's there today. So, another sin of the city of Marlborough, as I say. Marlborough mourns. On September 19th, 1892, his obituary in the Marlborough Enterprise stated, he died on September 19th, 1892. His obituary in the Marlborough Enterprise the next day stated that he expired at 5:30 p.m., just as the whistle on his factory blew for the close of the day's work. That's something. He was waked at his home. It was like one night wake. It was mainly for family and close friends. His funeral was held on the afternoon of September 22nd. I want you to think of anybody else in Marlborough that had a funeral like this man had. Let me read off. All the stores were closed. The schools held just a morning session because the funeral was in the afternoon. All banks suspended business. City highway employees did not work. The Boyd and Corey factory closed for the day. In fact, there was a general suspension of business all in the whole town, the whole city of Marlborough. So you can see what an impact he had. And there's more. On that day, there was only a simple service held in his home. They felt that there would be too many people that would want to attend, so they said, we'll hold a memorial service later on. So they just had a simple service. And at the close of the service, approximately 200 workmen from his factory and the street railway marched two abreast into the home to view Mr. Boyd's body, followed by about 75 ladies from the factory to take a farewell look too. Some of the pallbearers that day was the mayor of the city at the time, George A. Howe, city treasurer C.F. Holyoke, the head cashier at the Marlborough Savings Bank, E.R. Alley, and the head cashier of the First National Bank, F.L. Claflin. Alley had worked, both these men had worked for Mr. Boyd at one time. I believe Mr. Holyoke did too. A lot of people worked for Boyd and Corey, so they're all together. The employees in a long line of carriages followed the remains to Chipman Cemetery on Stephen Street. I'll show you where that is in a few minutes here, but it was estimated that, let me get to that after. I didn't put it in here, but the streets from Main and Florence Street, Main and Fairmont Street, all the ways down Main to East Main, all the ways up East Main and up Stevens, was lined with people. Lined with people following the procession. They had the, of course back then there was no John Rowe, you know, and an automotive hearse and everything. It was the glass enclosed hearse with the horses drawn, and all the other carriages with the family and everybody followed. All the employees that these ones I talked about here were following behind, and then they walked by and all the school children were out, and everybody was out because everything was closed, and they all came down to bid say their final farewell. It was estimated that at the gravesite at the Chipman Cemetery on Stevens Street, which is next to Rocklawn Cemetery. Rocklawn's the newer part of it. Chipman, I see someone right here that I know his parents are buried in Rocklawn, and as a matter of fact, I met him there one day, and this is his gravesite, right? This whole thing right here is where his gravesite. So 1,000 people. You got to remember too, there was not much probably around there at the time, but 1,000 people circled around the gravesite to bid him farewell and to give you a closer view of. This is his Samuel Boyd and his two wives right here, and out front here, his children and the two daughters that married their husbands and their children are out here too, along here. That alley I was talking about, he's buried behind him back here. And a lot of Marlborough's Sylvester Buckland, who's the father of the Marlborough Fire Department, is buried right up here. Mort Stevens, who was a movie actor, television actor, is buried in this cemetery here. So a lot of old graves down there. Yeah, so he was you could see how well-liked Mr. Boyd was. Everybody in the city loved Sam Boyd and what he did for them and everybody. He was very generous, as you could see. He did so much for them. It was unbelievable. A memorial service was then held on October 9th at the First Church, and it was given by his pastor, a Reverend Burke Levite, and he did a discourse in memorial of Sam Boyd. I'm not going to read it for you because it's about 30-some-odd pages.
Thank you.
A lot of what I've told you already was in this discourse. It told about his life, but it dug more into his life, about his home life and what a family man he was, how he loved. His home was open to everybody. He could be doing business with you, and it wasn't maybe very good business, but he'd invite you into his home, and the minute you came into his home, it was like you were best friends. And he would give you whatever he had. And so he was a real religious man. He was involved with religious instruction at his church and a lot of other things. And these are all different personal points that's brought out at this memorial service and this discourse, this 30-some-odd page discourse that his pastor gave to him, which was, they had a packed church again, and overflowing people out onto the street and everything. They couldn't fit everybody in there. Everybody wanted to be part of it and be there. So for over a half a century, 56 years to be exact, Samuel Boyd stayed at home and did his life work, building up his native place, Marlborough, just as he said he would when he started out in 1836. For this reason, he truly can be characterized as the father of our city. I hope you agree with me after hearing my presentation. I'd like to open it up if anybody has any questions. Hopefully I have the answers. Paul?
I got two questions, Bob. I'm just curious, the wavy hair, the high forehead, the faraway look, the short stature, is there any chance that you're descended from
Very good. Look, the same grimace.
And I've got all his money, but it's over in Switzerland.
The second question, the Fairmount Park, could you, on the map, could you point out where Fairmount Park might have been?
All right, you're going to have to bear with me because I'm going to have to go back to it. Fairmount Park would have been up in here, right up here. They had a big bandstand up here that they would hold things. They do fireworks there.
Right at the top of it?
The top, yep. Yep.
Is it where all those large rocks are? There's some huge rocks.
Oh, I don't know. There's houses up here now. See right here? See where his house was? There's Onamog Street, which is down here. It was just a paper street for years and years. Now it comes down like this and goes right down next to those condominiums right there. And there's all houses up in here now. That's why we can't have fireworks from Fairmont Hill anymore, because they built houses up there. You know, so that's why we can't have fireworks there. But it was right in this general area, right in here.
Was Park Street somehow related to it? Was
Park Street, well, Park Street would have been right here. This street here was a different name at the time, at the Center Street back then. And Park Street came up like that down.
Did that lead to the park?
No. It came up to Fairmont. Then Fairmont got extended. Fairmont now comes up like this here. Fairmont stopped up. Fairmont basically stopped here. And then they kept bringing it farther and farther and farther up, and now it's even up to here someplace.
There's an interesting point that's sticking in my mind here. Henry Ford has long been regarded as the founder of, the assembly line and all the things that we know as modern manufacturing. Yet look at what Mr. Boyd did way before him.
Yep.
That's kind of revealing about what he was about and what our city was influential in terms of the entire Industrial Revolution.
Yep.
It's astounding.
Now, how many of you agree with me that he was the father of our city? Raise your hand. Overwhelmingly. Thanks for coming.